Good evening, you're watching TDM Talk Show. The Consulate General of Ireland to Hong Kong and Macau has a new Consul General. He was appointed in August of last year and will be serving both SARs for 4 years. Let's get to know him more to talk about his plans and his thoughts on Brexit. Let's welcome Consul General David Costello. Good evening, Consul General, and welcome to Macau.
Hi, Karen.
I believe this is your first time here in Macau.
Well, it's my first official visit. I have come on a couple of occasions since I've arrived in August, but I haven't had official meetings until I met the Chief Executive and I met with the Commissioner for the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. So now I can engage in a more formal way. So I'm delighted to be a guest on your show.
And what can you say about Macau?
It's lovely. I really like it. It opens your eyes. It's something that's really unexpected when you come in, because it's really, when you look at the size, it's very, very small. But when you arrive and you see so many people and you see the diversity. And one thing I'm struck by very much is the history in the place. Many places that this small, with the pressure and development, there's a tendency to knock anything that's old and build something new. But I'm really delighted to see that, particularly in the old village on the Cotai side, that a lot of the Portuguese...
The old taipa.
Yeah, the old type of the Portuguese architecture history is still there, and I think it really makes Macau what it is.
Right, and you were appointed as the Consul General last year, but before you were deployed to different places. Could you tell us more about it? You've been to Mexico and in Romania, right?
Yes, I'm 10 years a diplomat now. I started out as Director for Reconciliation in terms of maintaining peace and reconciliation on the island of Ireland, something quite topical now with Brexit debate happening. After my stint as Director of Reconciliation, I spent 4 years as our Deputy Chief of Mission in Romania, and I was posted to Bucharest. And then for the last 4 years, I've been in Mexico City. And I served as our Deputy Chief of Mission there, but that was a much more regional role and included a lot of trips down to Colombia, where there was a great peace process happening there, and we did a lot of lessons learning, sharing between the experience in Ireland and those that were carving out a new path for themselves in Colombia.
And how's the transition so far? It's been a couple of months.
It has. I mean, I had never set foot in Asia before landing in Hong Kong Airport, so it really is a cultural shift. But it's amazing. Straight away, I mean, what we Irish do, we always look for connections.
Right.
And so walking around the streets of Hong Kong, it's just littered with Irish names like Kennedy, Jackson, even Des Vaux Road, which is a French name, but it's an Irish family. And it's the same, finding the connections here is also quite interesting. And I've come across a Sir George Chinnery, a painter of renown about 200 years ago, who married an Irish woman, so and spent most of his life in Macau and became famous as a painter here.
And what are your main goals for the next 4 years, particularly in Macau?
I had a really good chat recently with the Chief Executive about what is it that's priorities, because there's a tendency of diplomats to come in and want to push their agenda, want to bring their culture in. And really, for culture to be brought in and cultural exchange to happen, there has to be receptiveness on the host side of it. Right. And there's two very clear messages coming through from all of the meetings I've been having, both with the government stakeholders and with the Irish community. Education exchange is something that is really valued. You know, there's a wonderful campus here now, the University of Macau. It has some great Irish academics on campus, in fact. And the opportunity there to grow with that campus by bringing some Irish students over. So that's a message I've heard very clearly, and I want to go back to our own higher education institutes in Ireland and try and encourage a greater interaction with the University of Macau and see where we can kind of build a cross-cultural understanding through education exchange. That's one very clear message I have, and I want to take that away. And the second message is around cultural exchange. I know certainly in this part of the world, Riverdance opened up a whole new audience for Irish culture and Irish music and dancing. And I think there's a great affinity among the wider Chinese population for Irish music and dance. So finding ways of bringing expressions of Irish culture over, but rather than organising it ourselves, finding local partners that will help us to bring it to because what I don't want to do, we have a small Irish community here, and it's, the risk would be to bring people over and only have the Irish as the audience, and that defeats the purpose.
What's the estimated number of Irish people working and living here in Macau? The last time it was about 50, but I highly doubt that now.
I think it's still around 50. We've got some really well-placed Irish business people in the hospitality sector, some very senior academics in the university, and when you include their wider family as well, it really does add up to more than 50, but certainly less than 100.
And I believe you've met some of the Irish businessmen here in Macau. What can you say about it so far?
Fascinating, it really is. I mean, many, those that have come through the hospitality sector have spent time in the United States, particularly in Las Vegas, and have come across with some of the hospitality industry. Others have come via construction and worked their way through. And the academics just found a new home here and found a very receptive audience. And some have actually skilled up here. I know in one instance we have an Irish professor who did his PhD in Macau and has become one of the world's leading experts on tourism, the tourism industry.
And in improvements, regarding the improvements in connectivity, Cathay Pacific in Hong Kong has launched the direct flights from Hong Kong to and from Dublin, and it operates 4 times a week. And as what data show, has been providing a significant boost in terms of different sectors such as tourism and then trade, or in terms of exports. Are we expecting the same thing that will happen to the businesses, Irish businesses here in Macau?
Well, I mean, there's 2 dimensions to that question. There's the people part of it, and then there's the business piece. And let's focus on the people piece first. The Cathay Pacific announcement or flight inaugurated last June, is the first flight from Dublin to any place in Asia. Okay. We have a lot of long-haul flights into the United States, even as far as San Francisco from Dublin, but we've never done long-haul into Asia. So the message has been quite clear from the Chief Executive of Cathay Pacific to me, is the flight is doing extraordinarily well. That flight, 4 days a week now, will bring 60,000 people each way between Ireland and Hong Kong Airport.
From Hong Kong alone.
And that's Hong Kong alone. And as soon as that flight was announced, Hainan very quickly announced a flight out of Beijing to Dublin. And Hainan are now just announcing that they will also fly. Yeah, they'll fly Shenzhen to Dublin twice a week, and I think those flights will complement the flights that Cathay runs. So into this region, we're looking at 6 flights a week now, and that will bring upwards of 70,000 people per annum in each direction. Now that's going to do a number of things. One is we have a huge Irish diaspora in Australia and New Zealand, and for them, Hong Kong will be the hub of choice to connect into Ireland. So rather doing 2 hops via Emirates into London, into Dublin, it will now come Hong Kong, Dublin.
To Hong Kong, Dublin.
And so what you find is that, I know for Tourism Ireland, who are trying to market that route, they're marketing in 2 ways. One is direct tourism traffic into both Macau and Hong Kong. And then the second piece of it is actually connectivity via Hong Kong into Southeast Asia and Australia, New Zealand. And that's why the flight will be hugely successful, because of that hub connection. And Hong Kong is one of the great airports in the world.
Of course.
But what's fabulous is that a couple of weeks ago I came over on a private visit, and we went back via the new bridge.
The Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau bridge.
It's been described as one of the wonders of the modern world, and you cannot disagree with that. And I certainly was wowed by the design and the engineering. What a feat to complete that bridge. Now, the irony is, when you get off a plane in Hong Kong Airport, you can be in your hotel in Macau via the bridge quicker than you can be in a hotel in Hong Kong Island. And so the bridge really does open up that international hub because obviously the Macau has its own airport, but the runway wouldn't be big enough for the long-haul international flights. So very much we see Hong Kong as a hub for both Macau and Hong Kong in terms of tourism destination. And I think once we get more traffic running across that bridge, once the shuttle services start running much more fluidly and with ease, then you will see a lot more tourism. And I think what Macau really wants is diversifying its tourism, and you will see a greater diversification of tourism because of that bridge.
And to develop the title of the city of gastronomy as well.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, one thing.
I'm pretty sure Irish oysters are really good.
Yeah, well, we've discovered a market here on the second part of your question is around trade. The big boost the flight has given us is our seafood. Because we have the Atlantic coast or the Atlantic Ocean on the west coast of Ireland, and so some of the great seafood is coming from the Atlantic. So we're able to fly now directly fresh oysters,
as fresh as possible,
fresh crab,
amazing,
fresh fresh octopus. Everything comes directly now. In fact, in September I was at the Seafood Expo in Hong Kong Convention Centre, and I met 6 Irish exporters at the convention centre, and they had in their tanks they had live octopus, live crab, because they were able to fly it direct.
Of course.
And they were able to cryogenically store it while they were bringing the seafood across, and it was in the tank full of Irish seawater in Hong Kong. So that really opens up a huge avenue. The direct flight has been fantastic from that perspective.
Okay, for those couple of months that you started working as the Consul General, what are the common issues that the Irish people usually face, both in Hong Kong and Macau?
Well, what's interesting is, for me, the biggest Irish diaspora in Asia is in Hong Kong and Macau. Yet the level of consular problems that we would experience in other parts of the world is non-existent in Hong Kong and Macau, because they're such safe places. So it's a real safe place to live and to work. And once people work and the opportunities to get to work, they're generally very successful. The one thing that you can say is Irish people are not afraid of hard work, and there's an abundance of hard work available if you've got the right mindset. So I think the opportunities that open up to Irish people in this region is fabulous. And
what's what's the population of the Irish people in Hong Kong? I know it's way different from Macau.
Yeah, it's not that much more. It's about 5,000 people, we estimate. It depends on how you count, because we talk about citizens and we talk about our diaspora. So we find that many of our citizens, for example, are dual citizens. They're with British and with American and with Australian kind of IDs, and some of them might be registered on those passports rather than on their Irish passport. But we know we have definitely over 2,500 registered on Irish passports, and probably the same again as dual nationals.
And it's already February, and St. Patrick's Day is fast approaching, and I've been covering different events of the Irish festivals in Macau, but St. Patrick's Day has always been an iconic and one of the most anticipated events in Macau. What are we expecting for this year, though?
I think it's a time to reflect. I mean, the consulate is only open 4 years. And when you land and open an office, you do a lot of things and you try out things that may not be sustainable in the long run. So we look at St. Patrick's Day. I mean, the first celebration of St. Patrick's Day was not in Ireland. It was in the United States of America. It was in Boston. So 282 years ago, the first Irish parade happened in Boston. And what we say about St. Patrick's Day, it's not an Irish festival, it's a diaspora festival. So we embrace the Irish culture, and wherever the Irish are, we embrace the local community. So I'm very much in favour of looking at how we can grow something organically, rather than bring something in and impose it on the local community. So one thing that has worked really, really well is our global greening. And over the last 2 to 3 years, the government here have been very good at greening the ruins of St. Paul's. And St. Paul's has a great kind of connectivity with Ireland, because the Irish Jesuits in this region have made an enormous contribution to education and to culture locally. And so to have the ruins of St. Paul, which has a real Jesuit history there, greened for St. Patrick's Day, gives us great pride. And so I'll certainly want to do that again this year, and maybe have a small reception with the Friends of Ireland and the Irish community around that. And then we need to look at how we also bring Irish culture in a way that is received by the community here. And I know that there are certain festivals throughout the year. And so I'm thinking that rather than try and just push St. Patrick's Day and put all of our efforts into that one basket, that we should look at different approaches to bring Irish culture to a Macanese audience.
To the Macanese community and also the Chinese community here. So we're not expecting a St. Patrick's Parade, but we're expecting more.
Yes, yeah, I think we need to have a more considered and a kind of an equal partnership in how we do it. I think there's a certain, you know, we have planted a lot of seeds. Some of them are growing really well and some of them are not growing as strongly as we'd like. And I think we'll find ways of engaging with the local communities here, because the one thing is I see very much a pride in local communities, a pride in who they are. And if there's something imposed on them, there's a sense to resist that. And so we learn as diplomats how to navigate local communities and local interests and find ways of partnering rather than imposing our culture. And so I'm very attuned and very sensitive to what Macau wants. And I would hope to work maybe with the universities and maybe grow something more organically out of the universities in the next 2 to 3 years, because that's really a source of great Irish celebrations around the world.
And yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think we're going to have, say, Irish investments here in Macau? More Irish investments here in Macau for the next 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, what the feature of Irish business in Macau and Hong Kong is our penetration in the professional sector. So whether it's at the upper levels of the big four companies like PwC, KPMG, Ernst & Young, or whether it is in the hospitality sectors, we have very senior business people there. The next step we do then is to grow our exports. And so using the direct flight now to try and create more business opportunity here. There's a lot of iconic Irish brands.
And Macau is a good market with all the hotels.
It is.
Restaurants.
Yeah, there's certainly no issue there. I think the issue though is that when we land in Hong Kong, there's another hurdle to jump to get into Macau. So even though it's only a half an hour across the bridge, there's actually a whole layer of bureaucracy that needs to be overcome to get our goods to market. And so we'll work locally with importers and distributors to see if there's ways of short-circuiting that you know, respect the rules, of course, of Macau, but find ways of bringing goods to market in a more pragmatic way. And that's something, because our producers tend to be small in Ireland, it's about bringing added value.
It's about 4.8 million people.
Yeah, well, Ireland,
it's
yeah.
a very huge
It is.
place.
I mean, there's two ways of measuring it. Ireland is, you know, in terms of citizens, taxpayers within the state is 4.7 million. On the island, including Northern Ireland, is about 6 million.
Okay. Now, we're going to talk about the Brexit.
Well, of course.
It's always this issue. So, there's a surprising turnout in the UK parliamentary recently, and Prime Minister Theresa May will be heading to Brussels for another renegotiation. And EU says that they've made it clear no more deal at all. Even French President Emmanuel Macron at the same time said no more, it's not renegotiable. So how are we expecting this meeting to happen? And will there be any maneuver? Isn't it worth having another go?
It's a really challenging process, and I think for many viewers, there's an awful lot of jargon being talked around Brexit that's not actually understood. You know, we talk about a withdrawal agreement, we talk about a backstop. And this is jargon for many listeners. And maybe if I just put some small context around that, if you don't mind.
Please.
I mentioned the island of Ireland is 6 million people. The border is about 500 kilometres in length. Okay, so it's quite a small border. If you look at the border of the European Union with its eastern border with Russia, Belarus, Moldova, Turkey, Ukraine, that's 12 times longer. It's 6,000 kilometres. And there's only 137 official crossing points on that side of Europe.
Right.
But on the island of Ireland, there's 208 crossing points for 500 kilometres. So trying to control that border in terms of the free flow of trade is impossible without shutting roads. And the problem around that is that we've had a history, a really bad history on the island of violence, of troubles, and it's not a time, we don't want to return to that time.
More than 30 years of chaos.
We've 30 years, 3,500 people dead in that period of time. Those 208 border crossings reduced to about 20 for security reasons. Neighbours who live 2 minutes apart having to drive 40 minutes around to get through an accessible crossing to meet their neighbour on the other side. So we ended up through those troubles and violence with those border communities separated. And what we're saying, and the Irish government has said from day one, our overriding priority is peace on the island. That is manifested in the Good Friday Agreement 20 years ago, in which both the Irish and the British governments are the co-guarantors. So there's an obligation, not just on Ireland, but also on the British government to protect the peace. That was really, really hard won. And so when we talk about a backstop, all the backstop is an undertaking by the British government not to impose a border. That's all it is. It's an insurance policy. It doesn't come into effect now because the withdrawal agreement says this is the conditions in which the UK leave, and it creates a window of 2 to 3 years depending on how negotiations will go over the coming weeks. It'll create a window of probably about 2 years, maybe a little bit longer, in which Britain and European Union will decide what the future relationship is. Now, we hope it's a fully inclusive trading relationship that continues to allow the free flow of trade. If that happens, there won't be a border. However, if that doesn't happen, then we still need an insurance policy to say no border infrastructure. Because that then brings us back to the vista of the past when the island was separated. And what I think is not fully understood, maybe if I finish on this point about it, what's not understood about the Good Friday Agreement is the Good Friday Agreement was really ingenious in the way it constructed peace.
Really?
You know, because we have two communities in Northern Ireland. One identifies itself as British, the other identifies itself as Irish. And what we said is that you don't need to pick one or the other. The Good Friday Agreement allows everybody born on the island, including Northern Ireland, to be Irish. They have a birthright to be Irish. They also have
have the right to choose.
They also have a right to be British, or they have a right to be both. And so all of the new generation that have grown up in the peace over the last 20 years, many of them are electing to take two passports and to be dual nationals. So they see themselves as a dual identity. And in any way, it never really mattered up until Brexit because we were all European anyway. But now Brexit takes that European dimension out of it, and for the first time it separates the UK away from Ireland, who will stay in Europe. And any question that has been suggested that Ireland should leave as well, that will not happen. Where places at the heart of Europe are, if the UK leave, we will be the biggest English-speaking country in the European Union.
Right.
So it's our biggest trading partner. Is the European Union. That single market is our biggest trading partner, so we need to stay. And we see ourselves fundamentally as European, and the last survey on satisfaction with Europe had 88% of Irish people saying we love being European.
Right. And being the former Director for Reconciliation, what would be the impact of this in terms of peace and stability between both northern and, also in terrorism?
The result of the Troubles was that urban planning in Northern Ireland was designed around separating communities, building walls. There are now more peace walls in Belfast now than there were at the height of the Troubles, separating communities. And so there's a level of lack of understanding and some degree of suspicion between the communities. And people who don't have a living memory of the Troubles still that sense of suspicion between communities are being perpetuated. And we end up occasionally still having flashpoints of conflict. Thankfully, we're not seeing the scale of debt that we had during the Troubles. But even recently in Derry, you know, we had a car bomb in the centre of the city. You know, and this is fringe Republicans taking advantage of the vacuum that Brexit is creating to kind of remind people that they have not gone away. Now, we don't see, certainly in the short term, a big flare-up of that. But but it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to see step by step how things could go wrong. And so there's a real responsibility on politicians, not just in Ireland, but Ireland, the UK and the European Union, to have a considered conversation around this. And, you know, I do get a sense that, you know, that level of problems in Ireland that the reinstatement of a border would cause is not fully understood. And so I've spent 2 of my years in doing reconciliation work in Ireland. Much of it was rebuilding relationships across the border, north and south, in places like Belfast and Derry, building cross-community engagement. So that understanding of how we learn to share our neighbourhoods, our island, has grown. And we've had major, major success. But dividing people again is not the answer.
Yes. Okay, yeah. And very, very quick question. Do you think there would be massive changes? By that, it means withdrawing or revoking Article 50 of the EU's Lisbon Treaty? What's your thoughts about this one?
The Article 50 that has been evoked,
yes.
the idea.
Do you think there's going to be an extension?
This is something that's kind of...
So hard to tell.
It's hard to tell. I mean, what's been interesting is very recently the British exporters group, one of the big British manufacturers group, in fact, are saying that now they are shipping inventory to Europe out of Britain with an arrival date after the Brexit deadline. And so they need certainty now if they want to ship, because they can't leave stuff at sea and then discover that a whole new tariff regime has come into place by the time it docks in France or in Netherlands or wherever it's going. So they're already issuing inventories for shipments post-Brexit date. What can't happen is, you know, the lesson from that is business needs certainty. Businesses don't invest on a week-to-week basis. They're making investments on the long term. If they're establishing factories or if they're establishing a manufacturing setup, they're doing it with a 20-year horizon in mind. Right. Ireland is one of the biggest centres for foreign direct investment in Europe. We've attracted a huge amount. And we do that by giving business predictability. We maintain a business-friendly environment, a common tax basis, an easy tax system to navigate. And we know they get they have that predictability that allows them to plan ahead. And Brexit doesn't allow that. So extending Article 50 is the same problem. To what end would you extend it to? Is it just to have another 3 months of backwards and forwards and not actually having a solution? Whereas if there's a clear, you know, the way I described this recently at a talk, if there's light at the end of a tunnel, you will keep going. But if it's still dark, you have to ask, are you digging down? And is it time to stop? And so if there's a clear roadmap to say that we know where we're going to get to, and we need 6 months, for example, or 3 months in which we need to put the legislation in place to ratify where we want to get to, then there will be an extension. But an extension to extend the current debate, we've had 2 years of debate, and there's still no clarity from the UK government exactly what they want. And the withdrawal agreement is the only game it's the only element on the table really at this stage. It's the only plan. It took 2 long, hard years to get that. And it's the way it is because of the red lines that the UK government put in place.
We only want to hope for the best.
Yeah, so if they're going to change red lines and they want to come back to the agreement, then maybe the European Union negotiators will be able to do something. But I don't see that withdrawal agreement being reopened at this point.
All right. And thank you so much. I know it's 30 minutes.
Okay, that flew. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope to see you here again very soon.
Thank you.
Say in a year or 2 years.
Well, I'm happy to say that since my arrival in Hong Kong and Macau, this is my first television interview, and I'm delighted to be able to come to Macau and do that.
Our pleasure.
So I'll come back at any time you want. Thank you.
Join us again next week for another episode of TDM Talk Show. I'm your host, Karen Keith. Good night.